Hello, Chris Recap here. Today we are going to explain a thriller crime movie titled The Shawshank Redemption. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button for 5 years of good luck. Try it, it works. The film opens with a drunken man named Andy, who's checking his gun in his car. The scenes cut straight to Andy in court, where he's proven guilty of his wife and her lover's murder and is punished for a life sentence. The scenes once again spin to the prison Andy is about to be transferred to, where a prisoner named Red is brought in for his parole evaluation. Despite serving 20 years in prison and admitting he's learned his lesson, they reject his case and send him back to the ground where he meets his boys, who have also been rejected previously. Red narrates that he's the guy who smuggles reasonable items for the prisoners in the Shawshank State Prison. That day, the sirens wail, alerting the arrival of new prisoners. Red narrates that the year was 1947 when Andy, a vice president of a prestige bank, was brought to prison. All the prisoners gather around to welcome the newcomers by hooting and calling them fresh fish. As they're being taken inside, Red and his friends bet on the guys that wouldn't last a day in the prison. One of his buddies bets on a fat newcomer, while Red bets on Andy for 2 packs of cigarettes, while having a completely opposite perspective on him. Now restrained with one chain, the guards are brought inside the prison, where the warden introduces himself as Norton and introduces his left hand, Hadley, who's the head of the guards. He emphasizes that the only rule of the prison is to praise the Lord and discipline. Up next, Andy and his batch are given a shower and forced to walk to their cells naked and with a pair of their boots. As everyone settles, the fat prisoner gets bullied by some prisoners, which successfully pushes his buttons and causes him to scream at the top of his lungs. Hadley shows up with his guard and beats him up so brutally that he loses consciousness and requires medical aid from the infirmary. The next morning, the prisoners are released in the cafeteria, where Andy finds an alive maggot in his food. Red's friend also shows up to take the cigarettes for winning the bet on the fat man. He asks one of the boys, who have duties in the infirmary, about the fat man's condition, but finds out he died because of Hadley's beating. The quiet Andy tries to ask the dead man's name, but Red's friend behaves rudely with him for being a newcomer. Later, during the shower, Boggs finally approaches Andy and asks him to be his friend in a perverted manner, so Andy ignores him and leaves, which secretly turns on Boggs. Andy doesn't speak to anyone and quietly does his chores for about a month, up until he requests Red to arrange a rock hammer for his rock carving hobby. Red switches the subject towards Boggs, who's taken a liking to Andy. Andy thinks he'll get rid of Boggs by telling him he's not queer, but Red brings to his attention that Boggs hardly qualifies as human, let alone keeping someone's word. Before departing, he introduces himself as Red and walks away. The next day, through laundry service, Red receives the hammer in a parcel in exchange for a pack of cigarettes. He brings it to his cell and gets it delivered to Andy via the librarian, Brooks. Up next, when Andy goes to do his chores in the laundry room, a man asks him to get some detergent from the storage unit upstairs. There, Boggs and his friends catch him by surprise and not only beat him but sodomize him too. With facing daily abuse, Andy survives 2 years in prison. One day, the warden gathers all the prisoners in the ground and asks for a dozen prisoners to volunteer in the resurfacing of their license plating factory. Red bribes the guard and gets his and Andy's names in the volunteers. While everyone is seen working on the roof, Andy eavesdrops on Hadley's whining about a large portion of his dead brother's will money getting deducted in the form of taxes before he receives it. Andy marches up to Hadley with courage to help him, but he takes this as a personal offense, so he grabs Andy by the collar and drags him to the edge of the roof, during which Andy talks about helping him dodge the taxes on the amount by gifting the money to his wife, since it's legal. However, the catch is that he will have to hire a lawyer for the paperwork, which can cost him money. Andy suggests that he will do the paperwork for him for free if he arranges 3 bottles of beer for his working team until the work gets done. Hadley takes this offer and spoils the men with beer, which Andy abstains from and happily watches the others. As Andy grows closer with Red, he is seen playing chess on a cheaply made chessboard. Andy asks Red to help find him some rocks in exchange for free tutoring on how to play chess. Red asks Andy why he murdered his wife, but Andy's response remains the same. He didn't do it. On the contrary, Red admits to his mistake and finds himself guilty when Andy asks about his reason to be in Shawshank. One night, Andy requests Red to arrange a poster of his favorite actress when Red's watching a movie. When Andy walks out of there, he stumbles upon Boggs in the real room, who once again tries to molest Andy. He whips Andy so bad that he's admitted to the infirmary and takes weeks to heal, while Boggs is thrown in the solitary confinement for a week. When he's sent back to his cell, Hadley beats him up so bad that he loses the ability to walk and is sent to an actual hospital. While Andy heals, Red makes everyone collect the exact type of rocks Andy wanted for his carving, and once he returns, Red welcomes him with the poster he had asked for and the rocks. As days pass, Norton shows up for a surprise visit and gets Hadley to ransack Andy's cell. Other than his Bible, rocks, and his poster, they find nothing, so they return. Up next, we see Andy being called in Norton's office, who makes Andy the new assistant librarian. As Brooks shows him around the dusty place, Hadley brings another guard, who wants to seek Andy's financial advice on his children's education funds. Later, during lunch with his group, Andy is struck with an idea of expanding the library with prison funds, which everyone thinks is a bad idea. Yet still, Andy personally approaches Norton to discuss the idea. As usual, he claims the funds are too tight, so Andy decides to write letters to the state senator personally, which Norton promises to post himself. Andy starts writing one letter a week to the senator, but never gets a response. Red narrates that in the coming years, the guards make Andy their personal guy to help file their tax returns. Andy gets overloaded, so he hires Red as his staff, who also works for free like Andy. One day, Andy and Red are called to the library, where Brooks has taken their friend, Haywood, under his knife. Andy helps Brooks calm down and release Haywood. Brooks starts crying, so they ask Haywood what he's done to trigger Brooks, but he claims that all he did was congratulate him on his parole being issued. Later that day, everyone declares him an idiot, but Red understands that Brooks has been in here for more than 50 years and has adapted to the customs of the prison. He would rather be dependable within the boundaries than independent in the real world. It turns out to be true when Brooks gets released and is settled in a halfway house given to him by the courtesy of the prison. They've also gotten him a job to bag groceries in a mart, but poor Brooks feels so alone and alienated from the world that he hangs himself. When Red and Andy read his last written letter, they are hit with a wave of sadness. The next day, the guards bring Andy to the warden's office, where a letter and boxes full of books have arrived under his name. Upon opening the letter, he learns that the state has allocated funds for his library and has gotten the library district to donate their books and sundries. However, Andy isn't pleased with the $200 check and decides to write the state letter twice a week. Hadley leaves him with a guard who goes to the bathroom for a while. Andy finds a record at that time, so he locks the guard along with the office and plays the record on the record player. He also turns on the loudspeaker for everyone to listen. For this, he gets put away in solitary confinement for 2 weeks. He comes out looking better than ever because he had the music in his head to keep him company. At that time, he encourages everyone to listen to music more often to stay hopeful, but Red has lost hope. The next day, Red's parole gets rejected once again, even after 30 years. He comes out disappointed, but Andy cheers him up with a harmonica smuggled in with the help of Red's competitor, because Red talked about playing harmonica back in the days. In exchange for the harmonica and Andy's 10th anniversary, Red gifts him Marilyn's poster. When the lights go off at night, Red plays the harmonica and feels alive once again. Next, it takes Andy 6 years to get the library funds expanded up to $500 a year, using which he remodels the library and gets Red to carve the Brooks name on the library's nameplate. In the same year, Norton also introduces a program for the prisoners' rehabilitation, which allows the prisoners to participate in community service. He tells the press that the labor charges would be very inexpensive, but he uses other sources to make plenty of money. We see that a road builder, who's also Norton's old friend, begs him to back off so he can take the highway contract to feed his family. In return, he gives him a heavy bribe and a home-baked pie, so Norton backs off. Red narrates that behind every shady deal of Norton, Andy was there to keep the check and balance of his accounts and found out a lot more dirt on Norton. Norton trusts him so much that he lets him see the secret safe behind a painting in his office, in which he keeps all his accounting files. In the library, Andy reveals to Red that Norton has so much dirty money, which he helps him launder using his cunning banker tactics. Red worries that some trail would lead back to Norton and Andy, which can be troublesome, but Andy explains that he keeps the money accounts under the name of a made-up person with all kinds of records to prove he exits, whereas he doesn't, so if the cops find out about their dirty money, they will be on a wild goose chase finding the non-existent person. The next day, Red asks Andy if what he's doing feels right to him, but Andy clears out that in order for Norton to approve of his library projects that are actually helping prisoners get diplomas, he has to butter Norton up by laundering his money. Simultaneously, the siren wails, alerting the prisoners of the newcomer's arrival. Red describes that the batch came to Shawshank in 1965, in which there was a robber named Tommy Williams. Red and his group immediately liked him because of his youth and cockiness. He was caught breaking in and stealing TV sets from a shop, so he was there for 2 years. At first, Andy takes part in pulling his legs along with the old squad, but when he marches up to him in hopes of getting his high school equivalency, Andy takes him under his wing and teaches him English from the start. A year later, Tommy fails to nail the exam in its given time, so he throws a childish tantrum and throws his paper in the trash before Andy checks it. Later, he has a word with Red, confronting that he let Andy down with his poor performance. Red thinks it's the opposite and that Andy's proud of him. He begins telling him how he got in prison by murdering his wife and her golf pro boyfriend. When he tells Andy was a banker, a bell rings in Tommy's head. He unites Andy and Red to reveal full details of the killer who was with him through the previous imprisonment, whose story confirms that he killed Andy's wife and her lover, which renders him innocent. Andy's grounds are shaken hearing this, so he rushes to talk about this with Norton, but since Andy is a useful asset to him, he has him thrown in the solitary for a month. A few days later, Tommy receives his result from the education board because Andy had submitted his paper. He passes with average grades, so the guard delivers this news to Andy, who feels proud. Sadly, Norton has other plans for him. He meets Tommy outside the prison in the dark and makes him confess if he was telling the truth about the killer that framed Andy. Tommy swears that not only he's telling the truth, so Norton has him killed by Hadley, and lies to Andy about Tommy getting shot by Hadley for misbehaving. Andy knows what's actually gone down, so he threatens to quit laundering his money, but Norton makes a counter threat of throwing him in the sodomist cell instead. When Andy gets out of solitary, he has a long conversation with Red about their future and exposes a location that holds a sentimental value to him in order for him to go there and find something Andy has for him. Red discusses with his friends and worries for him. Haywood also talks about Andy borrowing a rope early morning, which makes everyone think he's going to hang himself. But Andy has other plans. After settling Norton's accounts and polishing his shoes, Andy returns to his cell, but the next morning he goes missing from his cell. After scolding the guards on their incompetence, Norton has Red in Andy's cell for inquiries, but when Red appears unaware of Andy's disappearance, Norton starts randomly throwing his rocks around in rage. One of the rocks passes through his poster, revealing that Andy has dug up a tunnel behind the poster and has escaped from there. The police search the nearby lake and find his belongings, including his clothes and his rock hammer. We see a flashback of how he got the idea of digging a tunnel by seeing the damp walls. It is then we see how he tricked Norton last night by switching his accounting books, stealing his shoes, and returning to his cell to escape. The scenes rewind to Andy escaping from the tunnel and climbing down the sewer pipeline, which he cracks open with a stone and crawls a long way to end up in the lake, from where he escapes. The next day, he dresses well and visits all the banks, appearing as the non-existent person he once told Red about. Since the laundered money is under his name, Andy succeeds in stealing almost $400,000 from Norton, and before vanishing, he sends his original accounting documents to the print media, which publishes a front-page article on Shawshank Prison and exposes them. Upon reading the news, Norton checks his accounting books and finds Andy's Bible instead, in which he had been hiding his rock hammer the entire time. The police arrest Hadley outside the prison and barge in Norton's office, but he shoots himself first. Days after his suicide, Red receives a postcard from Andy with a secret name, which is actually a location for his current whereabouts. Red narrates that Andy has left him inspired forever, and that he often becomes sad in his absence. He stays in the prison and volunteers in the community service to help clean graveyards. 10 years later, Red passes his evaluation and is given Brooks's house and his job, which makes him go through the same emotions. He feels like breaking his parole to be sent back to Shawshank, but he recalls the promise he made to Andy. He hitches a ride to the exact location and walks for hours to find the oak tree, under which he finds the black stone. Upon lifting it, he finds a box in which Andy has left him cash, and a letter asking him to join him in his ventures and make his life worth living for. Red finds hope once again, so he ditches his job and travels all the way to a beach, where he unites with Andy and ends the film. I hope you liked the story recap. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.